A little while ago I told you a story about the FMI sisters, the Daughters of Mary Immaculate, who have their headquarters and their origins around Rabaul, and the story of TB that got into the group and almost devastated it, so much so the bishop stopped any new recruits, any new candidates coming to the sisters. Anyway, it was resolved through the work of a doctor, and afterwards of course the bishop allowed candidates to come again, and there was a growth going into the 1930s. The next story I want to tell is when the Japanese arrived in the Second World War, 1942. And that was a devastating occasion and a time for the mission in that area, in the Rabaul area, the Vicariate. And there's a whole story of the Australian troops who got the order, every man for himself, and they took off and walked overland, and that's another whole story of Father Ted Harris. Back at the headquarters for the missionaries, most of whom were German priest brothers and sisters, they were interned by the Japanese at Vunapopi and restricted to certain buildings and certain areas around there. Later in the war, they were removed to Ramali prison camp, a valley outside of away from Vunapopi, where they dug tunnels and caves into the hills and lived there. That's another whole story also. At that time, the FMI sisters, the bishop said to them, change out of your habits, get into civilian dress and disappear into your villages, and then you'll be safe from the Japanese. The sisters said, no, we're sisters, we're religious, we're going to keep our habit and we will continue our religious life even though the Japanese are here. Strong women. and so they did throughout the war. They moved, they had different houses, different convents around the area, so they moved from one place to another, avoiding more contact with Japanese. They continued their religious life as best they could, and they grew gardens for food so that they could survive. And with some of that garden food, they took it through the bush, through the jungle, to the European sisters and brothers and priests and the bishop at Ramali, and got more food to them. So that's why they spent the war, and dodging the Japanese, and occasionally they had encounters with the Japanese. So they remained faithful to what they were, what they'd professed, and they came out of that stronger. Now, there was a story of a particular Japanese officer who was really wanted to be really tough on the sisters and told them to stop what they were doing, and tried to control them and told them to stop believing and stop practicing their faith and stop helping the missionaries, etc., etc. And one of the sisters stood up, and I've forgotten her name now, but she's famous amongst the FMI sisters. She said, no, we will do what we have to do. You can do what you like. And he said, don't you know I could kill you? I could kill you right now, right here on the spot. And she said, go ahead, kill me, I don't care, kill us all. God wants us to survive, we'll survive. If not, we die. So he backed off. And they continued. And part of the story is that the Japanese soldiers became very frightened of these holy black women, that they had power, that they were strong. And again, through that experience, although they lost some sisters during the war, 10 of them, and through the hardship of the way they were living, some were sick, some died of their sickness. So there was a hard time, and the Japanese could have rounded them all up and shot them. That was war, that was what happened. But they remained strong, and they came through it. And then after that, again, there was an increase in numbers as the mission had a huge job of rebuilding and re-establishing the mission and in that too, from Europe, great request for reinforcements and recruitment of people. And the FMI sisters were right there in the middle of that rebuilding and re-establishing of the mission. And again, another experience that made them strong. And so mission goes through hard times, difficult times, times when we think it's all finished, it's all going to die. And in those times, of course, what we believe is, listen, God, if you want this to happen, you make it happen. I'm here, I'll do as much as I can, but it's your work. If you want it to succeed, it will succeed, whether I do it or somebody else does it. And that's mission. Let's continue our mission for Christ, for the church, for the good of our society and humanity. Thank you for being with us.